Hello everyone, it's Night Messenger, back with another horrific true crime case. Today takes us to the beautiful country of Japan. Known for its respectful, hardworking, and innovative culture, Japan is a country of beauty, culture, and belonging that has been built into their history for hundreds of years. Unfortunately, there's also crime, just like the rest of the world, and today's case is tragic, unsettling, horrific, and something nobody should ever experience. This is the case of Junko Furuta, a real story that will leave you shattered. I want to emphasize before starting the video that this tragic murder contains explicit material of torture, rape, assault, and death. If this disturbs you, please click off, and I hope to see you in another video. Nobody should have to experience what Junko Furuta had to endure, and every time I hear this case, it makes me feel uneasy. My heart goes out to the Furuta family and Junko Furuta. Junko Furuta was born in Misato, the Saitama Prefecture of Japan, in 1971. She lived with her parents, her older and her younger brothers. As a teenager, she attended the Yashio Minami High School, and during her free time, worked part-time at a plastic molding factory. She had been doing this so she could save up money for a graduation trip that she was planning. Junko was hardworking and driven, and she didn't want to put financial burden on her parents and wanted a bright future ahead of her. She was known for being a beautiful and bright girl. She didn't smoke, drink, or use drugs. She always got good grades, and she was quite popular. Junko even had dreams of becoming an idol singer, but accepted her first step into adulthood by working at an electronics retailer after she was finished with her graduation. But everything would change in November 1988. There was a boy named Hiroshi Miyano who had an infatuation with Junko. He liked her, and when he was ready to confess his feelings, he went to her with a proposal. However, Junko denied it. Hiroshi had a history of getting himself into trouble since elementary school, such as shoplifting and damaging school property. As Junko was a hardworking and kind person, Hiroshi was a bully and always bragged about his connections to the Yakuza. The two of them were just complete opposites, and Junko simply didn't feel the same way. Hiroshi couldn't take the rejection from her, and it made him furious. Confessing his feelings and facing rejection destroyed him, and he knew he had to take revenge on her. Later, on November 25th, Junko was riding her bike home from her part-time job when she was attacked by a random boy who threw her off her bike and ran away. Shortly after, Hiroshi, the boy who was rejected from Junko, approached her. He claimed to have seen the whole thing and wanted to walk her home for safety. Junko, unsettled about the situation, accepted his kindness and agreed. However, this would be a huge mistake. Junko had no idea the danger she was in, and had no idea that this was a planned kidnapping. Hiroshi and his friend Shinji Minato, the one who threw Junko off the bike, were actually wandering around the area with the intention of robbing and assaulting women, until around 8:30 when they spotted Junko finishing her shift. That's when Hiroshi ordered Shinji to kick her off the bike and flee the scene. Rather than walking Junko home, Hiroshi led her to an abandoned warehouse, where he told her of his Yakuza connections, threatening to kill her and her family if she made a sound. Junko, terrified, submitted to Hiroshi as he raped her. Afterwards, he called 3 of his friends, including Shinji, the one who helped organize the attack, and bragged about the rape. The group had a history of gang rape, and had recently kidnapped and raped another girl. However, they let her go when they were done, but not with Junko. Her suffering only began. His friend Joe Ogura then asked Hiroshi to keep her, so the rest of them could join in. At around 3 a.m., Hiroshi took Junko to a park, where the rest of the gang were waiting. The gang told her they found her address from a notebook in her backpack, and told her they knew where she lived, and that Yakuza members would kill her family if she attempted to escape. Afterwards, the 4 boys took her to Shinji's house in the Ayase district of Adachi, where she would be gang raped and beaten by the entire group. This demonic house was where Junko remained for 40 to 44 days of terror. Shinji introduced Junko as his girlfriend to his parents, and told them that she would be around in the household. The parents didn't know Shinji had a girlfriend, or that she was clearly being forced to act as one. it only took a little bit of time before the parents knew something was going on, but they wouldn't report it to the police. Shinji's parents were also afraid of their son's violent behavior and his Yakuza connections, so when they saw suspicious behavior taking place under their roof, they tried paying no mind to it. Meanwhile, upstairs, Hiroshi, their son, and friends continued using Junko as their sex slave and punching bag. For between 40 to 44 days, Junko was held captive by Hiroshi and his friends as they tortured, raped, and brutalized her on a daily basis. On November 27th, Junko's parents noticed that she'd gone missing because she hadn't been home in 2 days, so they contacted the police about her disappearance, and the police began to investigate. As news caught on about Junko's disappearance, Hiroshi also began to understand what was going on. Shortly after the investigation, he forced Junko to call her mother to convince her that she had ran away but was safe and just staying with some friends. After hearing from Junko, her mother was still concerned, but at least reassured that she heard from her daughter and told the police to stop the investigation. After the investigation stopped, Hiroshi felt empowered and began inviting others to join in on the torture, knowing that they wouldn't get caught. Hiroshi invited 2 boys, Tetsuya and Koichi. They arrived to Shinji's home and once welcomed, went upstairs, where Junko was sitting, wearing a long-sleeved t-shirt and a skirt that Hiroshi stole from a clothing store. The gang drank cough medicine, pretending it was drugs, and acted high. Junko, feeling frightened, tried to run away, screaming in fear, but Hiroshi grabbed her legs. Then, Koichi put a pillow over her face and suffocated her. With all the startling noises upstairs, the parents woke up and went to go check on the scream. However, Shinji told them it was nothing and to go back to sleep. The group then proceeded to gang rape Junko. During this time, she was in a state of unconsciousness, staring at the ceiling without blinking. Over the course of 44 days, Junko was raped over 400 times by Hiroshi, his friends, and everyone he invited. And before we go into the forms of torture Junko had to face and endure before her death, I want to give a huge trigger warning. It is unsettling, it is morbid, it's disgusting, and it's sad. While torturing Junko, they would insert iron bars, scissors, skewers, fireworks, and even a light bulb into her genitals, destroying her internal genital organs, leaving her unable to defecate or urinate properly. When they weren't raping her, the boys forced her to do terrible things, such as shave her pubic hair and forcing her to dance while naked, eating live cockroaches, masturbating in front of them, and even drinking her own urine. They would also force feed her large amounts of alcohol, milk, and water. She was also forced to smoke multiple cigarettes at once and inhale paint thinner. When they weren't entertained by her, they left her on the balcony in the middle of night with little to no clothing. As time passed, her body was very much alive, but her mind wasn't. As the boys began to slowly get bored of raping her, they began to solely torture her. Junko was hung from the ceiling and beaten with golf clubs, bamboo sticks, and iron rods. Her eyelids and genitals were burned with cigarettes, lighters, and hot wax. As time continued to pass, Junko suffered seizures from untreated infections and malnutrition, but continued to endure as Hiroshi repeatedly burned her legs and arms with lighter fluid. By the end of December, Junko was severely malnourished, and due to her severe injuries and infected burns, she became unable to walk and was confined to the floor of Shinji's room because of her extreme weakness. It got so bad that Junko asked her captors just to kill her. She didn't want to live anymore, but something kept holding her on. Junko's appearance was dramatically altered from the brutality of the attacks. Her face was so swollen it was difficult to make out her features, and her body was so severely crippled that it began giving off a rotting smell. This caused the 4 boys to lose sexual interest in her, and as the boys couldn't rape her anymore, they decided to go out one night and kidnapped a 19-year-old woman who, just like Junko, was on her way home from work. They gang raped her and let her go. This brings us to the day of Junko's death. on January 3rd, 1989, Hiroshi lost a game of mahjong, and that very next day, Hiroshi, still pissed about his loss, took out his anger on Junko. He beat her, ignited a candle and dripped hot wax on her face, placed 2 short candles on her eyelid, and kicked her. Junko's body fell onto a stereo unit and collapsed. Since she was bleeding profusely and pus was emerging from her infected burns, the 4 boys covered their hands in plastic bags. They continued to beat her and dropped an iron exercise ball onto her stomach several times. Junko tried, with every last will in her soul, to endure, but gradually became unresponsive and died. Afraid of being penalized for murder, the group wrapped her body in blankets and shoved her into a travel bag. They then put her body into a 55-gallon drum and filled it with wet concrete. At around 8 p.m., they disposed of the drum in a cement truck in Koto, Tokyo, hoping they would never be caught. However, 2 weeks later, Hiroshi and Joe Ogura were arrested for the gang of the 19-year-old they kidnapped back in December. And on March 29th, 2 police officers came to interrogate them, as the woman's underwear had been found at their addresses. During the interrogation, Hiroshi believed that they found out about Junko's murder, and thought Ogura had confessed. This is when Hiroshi gave up, and told the police where to find Junko's body. The police were confused at first, because they were referring to the murder of a different woman and her 7-year-old son that had occurred around the same time as Junko, but they decided to investigate. The police found the drum containing Junko's body the following day. On April 1st, 1989, the 4 boys were arrested, and as time had passed, other accomplices involved with Junko's torture were officially identified, including Tetsuo and Koichi, who were charged with after their DNA was found on and inside the victim's body. Despite the amount of horrific evidence against the boys, they got shockingly light sentences. The identities of the defendants were sealed by the court because the boys were minors at the time. So the 4 boys were identified as A, B, C, and D, while Junko's identity was referred to as E. However, her real name and photos soon got leaked and splashed across every Japanese newspaper and TV program. Actually, the only reason we know the 4 monsters' names is because of journalists from Shukan Bunshun magazine who decided to break protocol, uncover their identities, and publish them, stating that, given the severity of the crime, the accused did not deserve to have their right to be anonymous. To make a long story short, we decided that beasts don't have human rights, said the magazine's editor-in-chief, Kazuyoshi Hanada. As the trial began, it became extremely frustrating, because the boys weren't charged with a deliberate act of murder. They were only charged with causing bodily injury resulting in death. And, in July 1990, only Hiroshi, the ringleader, was handed the maximum sentence for the lesser charge, which was 20 years in prison. The others only received between 5 to 9 years each. Angered by these light sentences, the Furuta family filed and won a lawsuit against Shinji's parents, and were awarded 50 million yen, which was roughly around $425,000 at the time, which Shinji's family paid by selling their home. It wasn't just the Furuta family that was outraged. The entire Japanese public was outraged that the death penalty wasn't considered for such a heinous crime. And one of the saddest outcomes of the Junko Furuta trial is that 3 of her 4 murderers went on to commit more crimes and hurt more people after their release from prison. After Hiroshi got out of prison, he continued to be involved with the Yakuza and was later arrested for fraud. After Ogura got out of prison, he was convicted of attempted murder in 2004 and served another 7-year sentence. And in 2018, Shinji was arrested again for attempted murder after beating a 32-year-old man with a metal rod and slashing his throat with a knife. If the goal of the Japanese juvenile justice system was to reform delinquent offenders, its efforts in the Junko Furuta case were an abject failure, the Japanese news magazine Shukan Shincho stated. One of the most tragic things about Junko Furuta's murder is that it could have been prevented. There were multiple times when the police were notified, and one time when the police went to the household to investigate Junko's condition. The first time was when a boy was invited over to Shinji's house. Immediately when he got home after seeing her condition, he He told his brother, who then told their parents, which contacted the police. Unfortunately, when the police went to Shinji's house, parents reassured them that there was no girl inside, and as the police thought it was a false alarm, they left and didn't return. Another time was actually by Junko herself, but before she was able to say anything, the monsters who held her captive discovered her and knew she was calling the police. Hiroshi picked up the phone and stated it was just a mistake, and the authorities never followed up. Junko Furuta's funeral was held on April 2nd, 1989. One of her friend's memorial address stated, "Jun-chan, welcome back. I have never imagined that we would see you again in this way. You must have been in so much pain, so much suffering. The hobby we all made for the school festival looked really good on you. We will never forget you. I have heard that the principal has presented you with a graduation certificate. So we graduated together, all of us. Jun-chan, there is no more pain, no more suffering. Please, rest in peace." Junko's intended future employer also presented their parents with the uniform she would have worn in the position that she accepted. The uniform was placed in her casket. At her graduation, Junko's principal presented her a high school diploma, which was given to her parents. The location near where Junko's body was discovered has since been developed and is now Wakasu Park. It has been more than 3 decades since this unfortunate incident happened, which resulted in Junko Furuta's death. People still remember the innocent girl and keep her in their prayers. One can never imagine the pain Junko had to go through in her last 44 days of life. A young, outgoing girl with a bright future ahead of her lost her life in the most horrific manner possible and never received the justice she deserved. This has been the tragic case of Junko Furuta, a crime that has been described as the worst case of juvenile delinquency in post-war Japan. My heart goes out to Junko Furuta. She was a hardworking and positive walk of life that deserved the future she set her life out for. My thoughts also go out to the family, and I hope the monsters that took her life away live out the worst lives possible for as long as they walk. This has been Night Messenger. I will see you all in the next video.